Future Krotnip here. I'm interrupting your programmed broadcast in order to make quite an interesting and an important announcement. Obiskis has just recently started to produce Warcrow content on his YouTube channel, and I highly recommend you all check him out. I've been following Obiskis' work when it comes to Infinity for years, and I really love his sober and enthusiastic take on the hobby. And I'm extremely happy to see him also migrate into Warcrow stuff, and I can't wait to see what's coming up next from him. He seems to be doing more or less the same type of content as I am. He's produced his first battle report, which is obviously quite a step up from mine since he's able to capture and use live footage of the game, which I enjoyed for one extremely much. And he's also released now his first unit focus video that's on a Science of Yaldabao unit, and it seems that that's going to be his forte going forward. So welcome Obiskis to Fighting the Good Fight. It's been quite lonely doing this stuff for quite a while and not having somebody do the same things, and I'm not going to be envious to you, even though I know you'll do a better job than me. I'm just happy to see more Warcrow content out there, and I can't wait to see what you produce next. So all of my viewers, go and check out Obiskis Hobby and Gaming. I'll be linking his channel to the description of this video if and when I remember to do so. And without further delay, let's get to the business at hand. Greetings to you all fellow travelers. This is Krotnip, welcoming you all back to the logbook of a simple Lindworm traveler. In today's quite special an episode of the Sagas of the Heroes series, I'm going to be taking you through two pickup games that were not initially intended to be battle reports. So, what were we doing and how it came down to this? Me and my buddy Tanan wanted to play a couple of pick-up games of Warcrow after having not played for a few weeks or so. And the idea was that we would be starting to go through the interplanetary adventures one by one, since neither of us had obviously attended, and we thought that this might be a fun exercise. So even though neither of us had been playing for a while, I had actually been doing quite a lot of theory crafting back home. I have been struggling to build the Northern Tribes list or lists that I would like to play and would feel confident with since the release of the Warc Riders, since I was very much set on forcing full availability Warc Riders and the Mounted Wrath main to my companies, and I just wasn't feeling the end result somehow. So what I ended up doing was something that I have done a lot when it comes to playing Infinity and preparing for events, and that is taking apart the missions, or in this case adventures, one by one, and then trying to figure out what types of units, what specific units or characters are good into the certain missions. And rather than doing this for the interplanetary mission setup, or adventure setup rather, I did this for all the potential scenarios and all the potential adventures. And then I started to try and formulate a Northern Tribes company that I would feel could be technically played into any potential adventure, so a all-comers list of sorts. So that's what I was intending to test out in our games that we ended up playing. At the same time, Tanan is in a really an unenviable a position, as he very much feels like he's going to be playing Mount Haven one day when the faction is released, but he doesn't have this primary faction to be of his at his disposal as of right now. At the same time, the general release of the Science of Yaldabaoth has started, but this has left the faction as we know it as of right now in a Frankenstein's monster type of situation, where some of the units are quote unquote new and updated to the current environment. Basically, what comes in the Song of the Dormant and beyond the Song of the Dormant boxes, while the rest of the stuff is still the stopgap profiles that were released sometime after we got the Warcrow Adventures released. So I can understand his frustration with trying to build uh, science lists as of right now, and also he's in the unenviable position that bar the rock troll, all the northern tribe stuff has already been released, so me playing my favorite faction and having access to so much more stuff than he isn't exactly a fair situation. But we wanted to play anyway, and Tanan was really good sport about this, so we agreed that he would be playing Northern Tribes in the first game, and as he speedballed some lists that he would be interested in running. I asked him to run a list that would still leave enough miniatures for me to build a company that I would be comfortable fielding into it, since I really don't have all that much drawing me to hegemony nor science at the moment. And especially when it comes to the hegemony models, I haven't painted all that many of them, so I really didn't want to field them unpainted necessarily anyway. So that's what happened, and that's the two games that we ended up playing. And it was only after when I reported some of my initial thoughts and findings on the games that one of our friends asked me whether I was going to be making bad reps of these for YouTube. And then the idea came that okay, even though specifically I had told Tanan that we would not be making battle reports out of these games, I ended up going back on my word, and after asking him whether it was okay, I was given the green light to report this stuff anyway. But what you are going to be seeing today is not so much a traditional battle report, even though yes, we are going to go through the games in a battle report sense quite quickly, but I'm looking to use these two games as a template to contemplate some of the things that I'm thinking about Warcrow as of right now. And with that lengthy prelude out of the way, let's get down to business. The first mission the first adventure that is in the Interplanetario was take positions as a scenario and resources as a feat. So I requested to Tanan that we start by playing that. As you can see, take positions is really a static of a mission or a scenario rather. You are looking to defend two objectives of your color, and by defending them against the opponent, you will get a single military point at the end of each round. And if you can secure enemy defended objectives, you will be given a single military point per enemy objective that you are able to capture by the end of round. Actually, capturing one is doubly valuable, since it will also deny your opponent the possibility of scoring their own military point. So getting ahead on scoring military points wise involves simply capturing one of your objectives for the end of one round, and that should put you in a decent lead when it comes to the military point acquisition. Resources is a feat that has been featured in one of my battle reports before. It's a stress intensive and quite demanding a feat when it comes to company construction, since it heavily incentivizes having a lot of units with 4 or more models in them, so as to be give you the possibility of using the least amount of stress to acquire the most amount of resources. It's also a good idea to have several larger units for this purpose, since obtaining resources costs a point of stress on the unit, and if you have more units to play with, you can spread out the stress more efficiently, and you don't necessarily become hamstrung by having your few good units full on stress because they were digging for resources instead of fighting. As you can see, if you haven't watched my first battle report yet, you are looking to obtain as many resources as possible, and you are getting a single arcane point if at the end of the game you have 4 or more resources on your resource meter, an additional arcane point if you go up to 7 or more, and a third arcane point if your resource meter hits the position 10 and stays there. And there is also a single arcane point to be gained if and when your resource meter is higher than that of your opponent's. And once your resource meter goes up to 10, then you start reducing your opponent's resource score by obtaining more. So essentially getting a 10-10 tie when it comes to resources is impossible, in addition to being otherwise also quite infeasible. Here's the list that I was running for my first game. It is a variation of something that I have been trying out of late. In the last time I played against Tanan, I tried a list that had Aalborg start at my deployment zone and everything else scout onto the battlefield from the edge of the board, and I was able to overwhelm his Science force when I was able to take them by surprise in rather quick a fashion. Knowing that Tanan is really good about learning when it comes to my tactics and evolving to beat them, I wasn't willing to go all in on scouts for a second time, and I also wanted to test out some new stuff that I had recently gotten access to, like the mounted Wrathmane. Originally, this list is supposed to be what you see over here, or was supposed to be, but I was supposed to have a unit of Tundra Marauders and a Hersir instead of Celica and the Ice Archers, but since Tanan's list was looking to field my only unit of Tundra Marauders, I swapped the Ice Archers in instead, since I haven't played them with Celica all that much, and I thought it would be a good exercise to see what I can do with them, and to try and find out what the combinations limitations are, so to speak. Beyond the mounted Wrathmane and the Celica and her buddies, the list includes Evoker for some emotional support / some terrifying trickery via the spirit of the Thermopleurus, and my current favorite force build of triple orc hunters. I love this unit to bits, and the more I play the Northern Tribes, more I have come to feel that the orc hunters are the only unit that brings all the stuff that I really want. They have a excellent damage output, especially considering their low points cost, and they accept officers and supports extremely well. And what I love a whole lot about them is the fact that their switch ability on the defensive is so damn impressive. The fact that you can trade wounds using your cheap orc hunters and use those extra blocks that the characters provide them, it feels so damn good. It feels almost like I'm playing some pseudo turns of my own, since I'm inflicting potentially damage against my enemy when they are attacking me. And this is my most important reason why I have been phasing out Battle Scarred from my lists of late, because they really aren't, in my experience, doing the damage unless I'm spending the activations, but the orc hunters are capable of doing damage without me activating them at all, so there's that. I really like the contender. I have been running her a lot of late. Wise Mane is a cheap budget option to lead one of these units. especially a unit that is supposed to be defending the backline against stuff coming from ambush. And lastly, I have been enjoying quite a lot running the Dark Master in a unit of Orc Hunters. I was very loathful of this combination earlier on, back in the day when scouts would have to come in after the battle had already started if they wanted to deploy next to a table edge, and this meant that the Dark Master's hunters had to sacrifice half an activation just to get there, and then they could move, but the opponent would then have the first say, or they would have their word to say on how to counteract them. But in the current rules update situation, the ability to scout a whole unit of Orc Hunters up to the enemy feels too good to pass up. I'm still getting access to sharp perception, and the Evoker can rally the Dark Master and his cronies should they get a situation of faint heart syndrome going on. So I'm really happy about this. Also, sneakily, having a unit of Orc Hunters as scouts can be pretty impactful in some of the scenario plays that many of the adventures can include in them. Me and Tanan have played a game of Northern Tribes against Northern Tribes some time ago also, and it was truly a bloodbath. So I was really excited to see Tanan build a Northern Tribes force of his own, and I was really also interested to see what he came up with, since he thinks about this stuff so much differently from me. So I was looking forward to this chance to learn some of the things that he would be interested in trying out. This is a direct quote when I asked for comments for this battle report from Tanan, and this list is essentially a compromise list that allows both of us to play Northern Tribes with the miniatures I have access to at the moment. From the very get-go, when we have been discussing the Northern Tribes, Tanan has been really excited to try and make Alvard work. And as those of you who have watched most of my videos know, I unfortunately don't rate him very highly as things stand right now. Fingers crossed for some type of update at some point sooner or maybe later. But as Tanan also notes, Alvard as of right now is quite pricey, a little bit brittle, and the only unit attachment that he can form is with the polar bear skin changes, which isn't such an amazing combo anyway. But Tanan was looking forward to running Revenant that I had just built the night before, and the new Warg Riders that he had no experience playing with or playing against as of playing of this game. He was also expertly using a unit of Tundra Marauders with a Prime Warrior attached. It sounds quite crazy, but when you see it on the field, it actually works surprisingly well. So this is something that I'm going to have to remember to break out in case of an emergency. Here's the table that we were playing for both of our games. As originally the intention was not to make any battle reports, I didn't take any photos of the games themselves, and I only returned to the table to take this picture after having some messages between me and some of my friends. So this is what we are working with today, unfortunately. Looking at this picture now, the house that's closer to the middle of the table was actually closer to the south table edge when we were playing. It has moved at some point before taking this photo, but after finishing the games. But hey, it's not going to be all that impactful, so let's just roll with this. As you can see, today's battlefield consists of two structures that block line of sight and are impassable to traverse. There are a couple of pieces of walls out there. Then quite close to the middle of the table there are a couple of piles of blanks that act as fences. There is a piece of ruins protecting one of the objectives on the left north hand side of the table. There is an impassable lake near the same objective, and then there are two dense forests that block line of sight, provide cover blue, and are technically rugged terrain for cavalry units and golems, but as the Warc Riders have the preferred terrain rugged special rule, they ignore this effect nice and clean. Trying to distinguish between the two Northern Tribes forces in this battle report was something of a problem, so I have simply tried in these slides to refer to the white Northern Tribes and the red Northern Tribes. Referring to white Northern Tribes sounds really bad to my ear, but I promise there is no sinister intention behind this. It's just that the banner on the Northern Tribes units is white, so I have been using a white coloring on the pictures in these battle reports for the icons for the Northern Tribes units. And I have been using a lot of red on the scions for exactly the same reason. So I figured, okay, if I keep using the white border for my units and I continue using red for my opponents, that should be the clearest way that I can present this in these slides. So from here on out, my forces will be the southern Northern Tribes or the white Northern Tribes, and my opponents will be the northern Northern Tribes or the red Northern Tribes forces. So I win the initiative and I choose the turn order. My opponent chooses the table side to deploy on, thinking that it'll be slightly easier to defend, and then we are off to deploying. My opponent has to start their deployment first, since I won the initiative. So they deployed their Revenant in the forest to my right flank, next to my right flank effectively. I counter by deploying a unit of Orc Hunters in such a position that I can use them to defend my objective and potentially threaten my opponents later on. Tanan then stalls for time, deploying his Tattooist next to the Revenant, and I do the same by attaching my Wise Mane to the Orc Hunters over here. Next, the Warc Riders come down to my left flank, and I seek to somewhat counter them by putting my Ice Archers closer to the left flank, but still in a position from which they can move towards my right flank to support the Orc Hunters should that become necessary. Due to the lower amount of units that my opponent's list has, the Skin Changers have to go down next, effectively telegraphing the position of Alvard. I add Celica to my Ice Archers in order to buy more time, and this means that Alvard comes down and now I have more or less the field to myself. I deploy a second unit of Orc Hunters pretty much down to the center line of the table so that I can utilize them on either flank as necessary, and then I use my mounted Wrathmane to anchor my left flank and protect the Ice Archers from anything coming their way, and I put down my Evoker pretty much in the middle so that she has access to all my units. Then it comes time to deploy the Scouts, so my opponent deploys their Tundra Marauders and the attached Prime Warrior next to my right hand objective, and after some careful thinking about this, I consider this flank to be the one that is more clearly threatened by my opponent. I feel that I am pretty confident that my Ice Archers and my Wrathmane can hold my left hand objective, so I try to do a bit of firefighting over here, and I deploy my Dark Masters or Hunters in a very defensive way. At this point, I think the dynamics of what's going to happen are quite clear for both of us. My opponent has a faster and more aggressive list that should probably take the advantage in this adventure early on, but my force packs so much more combat power and especially redundant durability and capturing power that in a long term I should be able to out wrestle my opponent even if I take more casualties than he does. So this very much sets the stage for this game. When Tanan submitted his list, I was a little bit surprised to see the lack of large units. There were no other 4 plus size units in his list except the Marauders, but I was thinking that he was probably looking to leverage very aggressive tactics to stop me from gathering too many resources, and then at the same time he could be doing the gathering with his Tundra Marauders. It may also be that he was being too kind to me and he didn't want to take more of the units that he was expecting me to field, so sorry about that, Tanan. Nevertheless, he takes the initiative in the aggressiveness department by sending forward his Revenant as fast as it can go, looking to fling it at my forces at the earliest convenience. I counter by sending forward my first and most expendable, at least in my mind, unit of Orc Hunters led by the Wise Mane. They capture my objective and aim to hold it against the Red Northern Tribes forces until help can arrive. Despite what many people seem to be thinking in, for example, the Discord server, both me and Tanan feel that the Tundra Marauders are really an amazing a unit, especially when it comes to the scenario play or the feat play elements of many of the missions involved. They also do pack a tremendous threat range. They are extremely mobile and they can kill stuff, especially not the most sturdy of stuff, but the scenario play and the movement are really their thing. Here we see Tanan's extremely great a mind at work in a way that I can only admire. He moves the Tundra Marauders to contest the objective that I have just moved my Orc Hunters to defend, and normally we would be tied on Conquest 2-2 and I would be able to keep the objective for my own. But what Tanan does is that he then mines or obtains resources with the Tundra Marauders, and this puts a point of stress on the unit. And this triggers the Prime Warriors Spurred by Your Energy passive skill that now adds a point of conquest to the unit, which means that without fighting at all, the Tundra Marauders have just captured my objective from under my Orc Hunters. Tanan has also been careful to place the unit in such a way that the objective itself physically blocks my Orc Hunters from counter-attacking, counter-charging, that is the Tundra Marauders, so they are relatively safe where they are as of right now, and I am left to scramble to counter this excellent scenario play move. To make matters even worse for me, Tanan then spends a command token and uses the Tundra Marauders to throw some caltrops to box out my Dark Master's unit of Hunters from helping anytime soon. So this was an excellent play by my opponent, and I really need to remember this for my future personal use. I choose to immediately reinforce my right flank, seeing that that's going to be where the action is going to be happening in the short while, and I want to be taking an aggressive stance against the Prime Warrior and the Tundra Marauders. I feel that they are the most grave scenario play threat for me as of right now. I move the contenders or counters just far enough to gather resources and I roll pretty well. This game actually has the exact same dynamic going as the first time around when we were playing resources, that even though we are more or less rolling for a same amount of times to gather resources, my dice are consistently better than Tanan's, and that gives me an advantage when it comes to gaining arcane points. And in some cases, especially in this game, I feel that it's not necessarily a advantage that I have worked hard to get, but rather that is given to me because I roll better on my dice. But hey, such is life, and I consider that as a whole, the dice don't mean as much in Warcrow as they do, for example, in Infinity. But sometimes when the marginals are rather small, then a few dice rolls can make all the difference all the same. Next up, Tanan uses the Warg Riders in a way that I personally feel is very appropriate for the unit. He uses their quick movement value, granted by their large base size, that is, to advance them to a threatening position midboard from which the Warg Riders can basically pick their victims if and when I send any of my warriors forward. And while I have not been overwhelmingly um, taken back by how amazing and how unbeatable the Warg Riders are, and I am not yet, as of right now, sure whether they can be used as the primary element of a Northern Tribes company. At the same time, I feel that this type of use for them is quite excellent. They aren't all that expensive, they do hit quite hard, and that enormous threat range gives them quite a lot of play when they are positioned aggressively. Tanan also is careful enough to make sure that the Celica-led ice archers can't come forward and double tap the poor wargs, so they are in quite an excellent a position from here on out. Next up, I activate my contenders or hunters again. I am unable to charge the Tundra Marauders from where I stand, so I spend a command token to make use of the contender's Defiant Leader command skill. And since resisting Defiant Leader's push or uh, attract mechanic requires a double success on a willpower roll, the single orange willpower Tundra Marauders cannot succeed, and they are forced to advance 5 strides towards my contender's unit, and they are also inflicted by the vulnerable state. And this means that my orc hunters are now free to charge and try and do as much damage as possible. Unfortunately, due to the fact that I had already gathered resources with this hunter unit, I could not afford to stress them again for additional performance, and their dice roll isn't all that great either, so I eventually don't manage to do all that much damage against the Tundra Marauders, and they actually hurt me a little bit back, so hey, there's that. But at least the Tundra Marauders themselves are now full on stress, which should hopefully force Tanan's hand when it comes to his next moves. Next, it's time for Tanan to spring the trap that he has so elaborately set up against me. Even though the Tundra Marauders have already activated and they are full on stress, due to how the rules update changed characters activating to leave a unit, the Prime Warrior is actually free to charge out of the unit, as this will only impose an activation token on her, and she charges my Orc Hunters. In the ensuing combat, she does quite a number on the Orc Hunters, but I choose to switch all my blocks to successes, and I actually inflict 3 wounds back on the Prime Warrior herself. But now, since the Prime Warrior has made an attack, she can access her command skill, Experience and Rage, which allows another Orc unit to declare a charge. and Danan decides to use the Revenant, knowing that its switch ability is especially dangerous when it comes to shutting down the counter-attacking power of the Orc Hunters. Later on, after the game is finished, we talk about whether it might have actually been a better idea to use the Warcrow Riders at this point, but obviously we can't tell after the fact. Even though the Revenant charging in fails to fish for those sweet hollow success switch triggers on its original attack roll, Danan very carefully weighs the situation and, seeing my defense roll, decides that it's a good idea to go for a charge attack reroll, and that grants him access to not only an excellent damage output but also some of those very important hollow successes that allow him not only to add successes to his own roll but also to reduce my blocks. And eventually, when it comes down to whether I can inflict meaningful damage against the Revenant, I decide that I cannot, since the veteran orc has not only removed some of my blocks from my roll, but also is protected partially by the orc scar's passive skill that reduces the incoming wounds by 1. So instead what I do is that I block the little that I can, which actually leaves my contender alive with her one last wound. Obviously, faced by such a terrifying onslaught, she is now well and truly more than 1 point over her stress limit, so she needs to make a willpower test requiring 2 successes, which she promptly fails, and she flees from her deadly assailants. At this point, the Tundra Marauders also have to pass a willpower test because they were left at 2 stress and their morale drops down to 1 since the Prime Warrior has left the unit. But the Varangs simply admired the blood works happening in front of their eyes, the splatter works happening in front of them, and they passed their test and no problems there. I decide that this is the perfect time to use the Ice Archers to try and salvage some otherwise quite dangerous a situation. I have absolutely no intention of charging that Revenant with my Orc Hunters if I can have any choice in the matter, because I don't want the thing attacking back at me when it's defending, and I most certainly don't want to wound it but leave it standing so as if to increase its combat power going forward. The Ice Archers move to within range and they fire their first shot, and in addition to dealing some damage and forcing my opponent to take the last third point of stress that the Revenant can take on itself due to its morale value to block some of the incoming damage, I then use Celica provided second shot ability to take a point of stress on my Ice Archers and gun down the Revenant for good. I really have a mixed feeling when it comes to the Ice Archers and Celica, but maybe on that a little bit further down the road. At this point, Tanant is afterwards commenting that he felt that the attrition game was more or less done for him. Had the Revenant survived there, he feels that there might have been a possibility for him to break me at some point, but as things stand, such a possibility is now unfortunately long gone. Tanan makes the, in my mind, correct assessment that there is no further damage that he can cause against my forces during the last activation of the round. But if he can keep me from taking out the Prime Warrior due to her stress increased conquest value, I'm going to be unable to recapture the objective any longer. So he simply uses what we call the bubble wrap strategy, strategically placing Tundra Marauders all around the Prime Warrior in a formation that effectively stops me from engaging her or shooting her for that matter. This means that I have little choice on what to do next, so I use my Wise Men's Orc Hunters to charge and attack the Tundra Marauders. But again, somehow I feel that my rolling isn't the best, and the Tundra Marauder leader is able to displace away, again having to face a willpower check to see if she breaks due to being overboard on stress. But hey, she passes again with flying colors, and life is good for the lone Tundra Marauder, at least for now. At the end of the round, the Red Northern Tribes have managed to not only hold both of their objectives, but they have also captured a objective from me, and that means that the Red Northern Tribes go to a 2-0 military point lead. Then again, the White Northern Tribes forces have gathered more resources, so it's looking like they are going to run away with the arcane point score, and the attrition advantage is clearly in my favor, even though I have lost an entire unit of orc hunters and my contender is very much wounded. The situation is doubly difficult for Tanan also due to the fact that the initiative stays in my hands, since the military points are immediately scored and the arcane points are not. In this instance, that is, so I get to essentially play 2 turns in a row. As per a suggestion by a viewer, I have now added a marking on the map about the military point and arcane point tallies for your convenience. At the end of round 1, both sides' reserves use the no one gets left behind moves to reposition forwards. In my case, that means sending the Evoker and the Mounted Wrathmane towards my left flank, since it's looking quite bare at the moment, and sending my last unit of Hunters forward on the extreme right flank. The reason I'm looking to play the Evoker and the Mounted Wrathmane together is that if I can cast the Spirit of the Thermopleurus on the Mounted Wrathmane and then use him to engage something while using his command skill Wrathroar, I should be pretty easily able to break whatever I'm facing, but unfortunately I'm staring down a fearless unit of Skin Changers, so there goes that plan. I choose to go first on the second round, and I immediately use the Wise Men's Hunters to charge and take out the Prime Warrior. Since I have the stress to spare, I also gather resources for good measure. Tanan tells me later on that at this point he is really feeling the attrition pressure, and it's quite self-evident that the right flank has fallen from his point of view. So his best chance of maintaining a high tempo on military points is to try and overwhelm my left flank next. And really the only choice for this mission is to employ the Skin Changers and Alvard, and forward they go. With Alvard's Skin Changers bearing down on my left flank, I choose that if I have access to a hammer, every problem turns into a nail, and I redeploy my Ice Archers towards the left and use the Celica provided ability to double tap the poor Skin Changers out of existence, even though I don't actually manage to overflow any wounds onto Alvard. This is an excellent showcase of one of the reasons why fielding Alvard at the moment is so damn difficult from list strategy point of view. If and when you want to have him escorted to the front line and thus gain the additional support and also the action economy, you have to use the Polar Bear Skin Changers, and even though they are 4 wounds a pop, they have quite a poor defense roll, and when they start getting hit, they start taking losses really easily. So here again, the ice archers do what they do, and unfortunately this means the end of the skin changers. Alvard is undeterred by the loss of his bodyguard, however, and even despite having been slowed by the ice archers, he has plenty enough movement to reach my mounted Wrathmane. I am fine taking this charge, as the Wrathmane has an excellent defense roll, whopping 6 wounds and elite to facilitate cancelling any damage coming his way, and also he has quite a powerful a counter attack when pushing for that extra performance on the defensive, and I see no reason why I shouldn't be accessing this extra damage as of right now. Tanan rolls really well after a reroll, and he actually manages to leverage the whole package of pushing for extra performance, charge attack reroll, and the switch abilities of Alvar to take my mounted Wrathmane down in a single go, which is quite impressive. But at the same time, my counterattack inflicts a number of wounds. I don't remember whether that's 2 or 3 on Alvard, and this makes him extremely vulnerable to a follow-up attack by my ice archers. Tanan later on once again notes how he feels that many Northern Tribes units are extremely good when defending or rather counter-attacking against high-value enemy targets such as characters, since they can often inflict some wounds when they are defending, which leaves the powerful and expensive enemy characters easy pickings afterwards. Lo and behold, this is exactly what happens next. Alvard is left stranded and wounded out in the open, so the ice archers have no problem shooting him down and walking in to reclaim the objective for me. Here's, however, a good time to discuss what's great and what's not so great about this ice archers plus Celica combination. Yes, being able to move that for 3 and then double shoot something is extremely powerful. Celica adds that important orange dice and an automatic hit to each of the shots taken by the ice archers, and the slow that the first shot will practically always inflict upon the target will mean that the second shot has access to the blue arrow's passive skill that will inflict yet another automatic wound on that shot. But then again, we are talking at a powerful but expensive unit combination. This entire package costs 55 points, and due to the fact that even with the help of Celica, the ice archers only have morale 2, they can only really access this extra shot once per turn if there is no resting mixed in there at some point, because there are no ways of reducing Varrank stress levels, at least in the game as of right now, mid round without resting. So the ice archers really aren't going to be accessing that double tap in most situations more than once per round. So you need to have them in the right place at the right time, then you need to spend the activation, and you can still access that double shot only once. Yes, this is a tool that really the Northern Tribes can't replicate in any other way, but I am still unsure how, from the list construction point of view, how good an idea it is to use them consistently. Are they a always food or maybe a sometimes food going forward? The Vark Riders do what they can to remedy the situation next, and they countercharge the Ice Archers. I'm pretty happy with this. I don't mind taking some hits with the Ice Archers at this stage, and Celica actually not only provides an extra member for the unit but also an automatic block for the defense roll, And even despite the charge attack reroll, the Warc Riders don't do all that much damage against my Ice Archers. But despite only going a single point over their moral value and having access to Celica provided red and orange willpower dice, my Varangs aren't as brave as Tanans are today, and my Ice Archers decide that it's time to head for the hills and they flee from the Warc Riders. Later on, Tanan remarks that not only was this the only option more or less available to him at this point, but he was also thinking that there aren't that many units left that can counterattack the Warc Riders and recapture this left side objective, so this seems like a good idea at this point. Next up, something really interesting and something really funny also happens. With my few resources available, I figure that Evoker has to be the one to do something about the Warc Riders, and it's time to call the spirit of the Thermopleurus in. But what we realize at this point is that, hey, wait a minute, the Warc Riders only have a single orange for their willpower, so there is no way for them to pass a test against a fully augmented spirit of the Thermopleurus, which will break the Warc Riders on contact automatically without a single blow being struck going forward. So the flimsy and so damn easy to take out Evoker casts the spirit of the big T on herself and then positions herself between the Warc Riders and the Ice Archers in such a way that the Warc Riders cannot charge the Ice Archers to try and hurt them off the field, and at the same time, if they stay on the objective, the Evoker is going to be able to charge or assault them during my last activation of the round, thus forcing them to flee. And this maneuver is something that gets a good chuckle out of Tanan also, and he feels that this is potentially a game-winning maneuver right here. And I would like to claim the credit for seeing this coming miles and miles away, but this is really more of a opportunistic move on my part. I use the tools that I have available, and this time they managed to produce the results that I am really looking for. Again, Evoker is such a puzzle for me. In many games I feel that I get practically no value out of her, and then once in every blue moon she does something like this, and I really have to reconsider including her more in my lists. For Tanan's second to last activation for the second round, he first starts to map out potential positions for the Warc Riders. Could they move somewhere where the Evoker can't reach them, or could they somehow squeeze past her to attack the Varang Ice Archers? But midway through these speculations and calculations, we remember that actually the Warc Riders have the Bloodlust keyword. So if Tanan chooses to activate the Warc Riders, there is a possibility that they fail their single orange dice willpower test, which happens 37.5% of the time, and they choose to charge the Evoker instead of whatever else they could be doing, and as the spirit of the Thermopleurus is in play, fully augmented, this would spell doom for the Warc Riders, who would charge in guided by their bloodlust but immediately flee due to a acute occurrence of the faint heart syndrome. So Thanan's original idea of maybe resting with the Warc Riders and retreating them in order to shed some stress for further fighting down the road goes out the window, and really the only thing that he can do at this point is try to run his tattooist to the left flank in order to maybe make a play with her later on. I don't know if I have ever charged my Evoker at anything, but hey, this is the time and this is the place. Unfortunately, I never get to roll my triple orange attack dice, since due to the spirit of Thermopleurus and the plan that this was all about anyway, the Warcrow riders can't pass their difficulty 2 willpower check and they automatically break and flee, allowing the evoker to reclaim my left hand objective with her mighty conquest of 0. Tana's tattooist moves forward to shoot at my evoker, and the chances are that at 2 wounds and only a single black dice for defense, the tattooist should be able to accomplish this task pretty trivially, but unfortunately Tanan's only hope at this stage fails him, and the tattooist rolls poorly, causing only a single wound on my evoker. Then again, would this have had a major impact on how the game ended? Not necessarily, especially since my ice archers rally and return to the field, but had they failed and kept on running, then maybe taking out the evoker could have had more long-lasting of an impact. At the end of round 2, both Northern Tribes forces are holding their own objectives, which means that both sides get a single military point for their efforts. This means that I am still by a large margin ahead when it comes to gaining arcane points through the feat, but that only happens at the end of the game, so it has no bearing on who gets to keep the initiative. So going technically in a 3-1 deficit, I still hold the initiative for the last round of the game. The last thing to do before advancing to round 3 is to perform the no one gets left behind movement. My Dark Master's hunters proceed down the right flank and my contender shifts left to protect that objective in case something goes terribly wrong. Tanan can only move his last surviving Tundra Marauder at this stage, and she shifts towards the center of the table for the time being. Despite being very much ahead on attrition and also by extension on the scenario, or the adventure rather, thanks to the fact that I have a commanding lead when it comes to feat completion, it feels really gross that I still hold the objective, and this means that I can start the third round by activating the ice archers and shooting down the tattooist without having to access my stress-inducing second shot. With the Warcrow riders still fleeing during the first activation of Tanans during the last round, there is nothing for him to do but to activate his lone Tundra Marauder. With my Conquest 2 unit of Orc Hunters with the Wise Mane holding down my right hand objective, no objective plays are forthcoming, so Tanan thinks that the only thing that he can really try at this stage is to assassinate my really wounded contender, but this plan is really dangerous from the get-go, and it blows back on my opponent when the contender takes out the attacking Tundra Marauder but survives the encounter, so she even gets a short extra movement out of this. The Warg Riders should have rallied at this point. We must have messed up the turn counter at some point because we don't do the rallying move here, but in the end that would not have made any difference even if the Warg Riders had managed to rally, since the way that we play the game out is that the Ice Archers move forward and use the Celica provided double tap once again, and they gun down the Warg Riders in one fell swoop. I think that this game was the absolute maximum what one can expect from the Ice Archers. And as I already said, I think jury, at least for me, is still going to be very much out whether the hefty footprint and the activation intensity of this unit is going to be worth it going forward. With all the red Northern Tribes forces having been wiped out from the field, we can effectively conclude the game there. I still have enough activations to capture both of my opponent's objectives, and I'm going to be outscore him on defeat 4-0. So this is going to be a rare complete victory, with the southern northern tribes winning both by military points and also by arcane points. Without further delay, let's dive straight to the second game of this session, which was Influence Zones and Track as per the second adventure of the Interplanetary Warcrow tournament. Influence Zones is a scenario that is all about capturing the 5 different objectives on the field. In this one, players are incentivized to not only protect their own objectives but also to capture them, since if a player has more objectives than their rival at the end of the round, regardless of the colors, they will receive a single military point. There is an additional military point to be awarded if you are controlling an objective of opposing color, and there is a single point in just getting 2 objectives or more. And this means that you can't simply passively wait out to see what your opponent is doing and then go for your own objectives. But if you are looking to get those 2 military points, the easiest way to do that is probably going to be to capture your own objectives. And if you want more, it's those 2 and the middle one that'll get you there the easiest. Obviously, for the maximum amount of military points and the maximum disruption of enemy plans, you will be wanting to access one of those enemy objectives as well. The special rules for this scenario include strategic domain, which increases the conquest value of each unit by 1 point. I am not certain as of right now how this actually affects gameplay. You aren't probably going to be having that many units on any given objective at any given time. So the fact that everyone gets a bonus single point really doesn't seem to have that much of an effect on the outcome of disputing the control of an objective. One of the ideas that I had regarding this was that you could bring a unit and a character in there and then detach the character to add even further points, conquest points that is, to your tally. But in the case of characters that naturally add conquest to their unit, often their solo profile has none, so it's a +1 -1 situation in most instances, so that doesn't make a whole lot sense. The type of model that probably gets the most value, at least from my estimation as of right now, from strategic domain is someone like Njord the Merciless, who can be delivered there by a unit, and then when Njord detaches, that's going to be a single conquest point that you'll be getting more due to the fact that his solo profile has conquest while his attached profile does not, and then you get that additional one from strategic domain. But I don't know, it doesn't feel all that impactful. What is way more impactful, however, is influence zones, not the scenario but the special rule. The traditional control and disputing range of objectives is 3 strides, but in this scenario you are looking at 7 stride range, which means that the circle around each objective from which it can be captured is huge when you compare to the standard one, and that changes the maneuvering and the dynamics of this game quite a lot in my opinion. And next up is the feed for today's second game, and that is Track. Even before playing this game, I had heard some people talk about Track, loving it or hating it. I think it was in the Touch of Tinge podcast that the guys were talking at some point how this can be a race to 4 type of feat, and I was really interested to see what that actually meant on the field of battle. What you do in track is that each player places their own token on the initiative track at position 1, and for those 2 tokens we will consider the initiative track the track or the tracking meter from here on out. And the idea is that the track feat, unlike many others, will conclude during the game if either player ever gets their track meter to position 4. So this is quite an interesting mechanic, since most of the feats that at least I have been playing so far tend to be scored at the end of the game, and there is possibility of continuing to play the feat until the very end very much. But in this one, whoever gets to 4 first cuts the feat part out of the mission, or the adventure rather, and also gets to score, or has to score rather, their arcane points immediately. Usually feats don't seem to have an effect on who's holding the initiative due to the fact that arcane points are usually scored at the end of the adventure, but when it comes to track, you actually score those 4 arcane points if you make it to the number 4 on the track immediately, which means that these arcane points will then weigh against the person who completed track for the initiative for the rest of the battle. When the first player reaches position 4 on the track meter, the other player will immediately score arcane points equal to the position of their marker on the track meter -1. So essentially the opponent will be scoring anything between 0 and 2 points, and to the victor the spoils in the form of 4 conquest points, arcane points, that is. Well, how do you advance your track meter then? Each player gets to place a vestige token that is specific to them, at least 10 strides out from their deployment zone at the beginning of the game. And this is the token that they'll be looking to track 3 times in order to get their track meter to the much coveted position 4. And how do you do this? You need to get a character or a unit that's being accompanied by a character into base-to-base contact with the vestige and end your activation there. Once you reach this position, you will be needing to pass a difficulty 2 willpower roll in order to track the vestige. Scout and ambusher units add an orange dice to their roll, making them extremely valuable in this feat. Not only can they reach the vestige more easily, but they also have a higher chance of successfully tracking it. However, the amount of luck involved is somewhat diminished, since a unit that is trying to track the vestige can in fact endure a point of stress in order to add an automatic success to their roll. So as long as you have stress to spend, EA, you're not at your morale cap, and you rolled at least a single success on your roll, you should be good to track the vestige. After successfully tracking the thing, your opponent then gets to pick up the vestige and place it 15 strides away from its original position. And the next time you track it, you track the vestige, they get to place it further 15 strides from where the vestige was when it was tracked the second time. And this will essentially create a dynamic where the vestige is usually going to be moving towards the opposing forces as you track it, making it more and more difficult for you to access the vestige and more easy for your opponent to defend it. A somewhat obvious tactic for a side trying to stop their enemy from reaching their vestige is to bubble wrap it with a unit of your own. But this actually isn't as perfect a solution as it sounds like from the get-go, since the tracking of the vestige happens at the end of the unit's activation, and you are allowed to be engaged when you track the thing. So what can potentially happen is that, okay, you bubble wrap an objective with your unit, that's well and good, but if an enemy unit then comes and engages you, beats you in melee combat and pushes you back, they can then potentially access that vestige by following your forces and then track it even while engaged in melee. So that's something to keep in mind. My company for the second game is more closely what I was actually intending to bring along for the first one, but I did make some small adjustments anyhow. I quite enjoyed playing Celica and the Ice Archers in the first game, and I'm planning on doing a Celica unit focus later on. And while I have been playing her a lot solo, I have not been running her in Ice Archers that much, so I wanted to give this combination a second try. I also brought again my trusted triple hunters. This time around I had enough points to upgrade the Wise Main into Lotta, so in she went. And lastly, I got to bring my maybe favorite unit combination in all of Northern Tribes, the Tundra Marauders and the Hersir, that I was unable to field in the first game due to the fact that Tanan was including them in his list and I don't have 2 units as of right now. I'm thinking that my Orc Hunters that start from the deployment zone and Celica's Ice Archers should be more than enough to wrestle the control of any friendly and or the middle objective for me, and then I'm trusting my Dark Masters Orc Hunters and the Hersir's Tundra Marauders to track the vestige once it gets closer to Tanan's side of the board. For our second encounter, Tanan switched back to his trusted and, as you can see, not so trusted anymore, Science of Yaldabaoth. As you can see from the quotes he gave me over here, Tanan is not feeling the science as of right now, and I can understand his point of view on this. The faction is somewhat in a Frankenstein's monster kind of place right now, with many of the units being still quote-unquote legacy cards, legacy units from the Warcrow adventures, and the game was in quite a different spot when those were designed and released. And then we have the clearly following the new specs of the game's design releases that are coming with the Song of the Dormant and beyond the Song of the Dormant. So I'm expecting the Scions to look quite different and quite a lot better in many ways 1 year from now, but this is what we are working with at the moment. And I also have to say that not all people share this disappointment with where the Scions are as of right now. Obiscus has been playing them as his main faction, and it seems that he's enjoying himself quite a lot, so don't get discouraged, fellow travelers. Tanan is looking to leverage some of his favorite combinations in this one, at least those that are in the Science of Yaldabaoth at the moment. He's trying out Master Uruk attached to a unit of Anointed, making them extremely tough by granting them that additional wound. The Anointed got changed quite a lot from their adventure release to what they are right now, and Tanan isn't really feeling the change. They lost some of their mobility, but more on that maybe at some other time. He brought 2 units of Intact, one flying solo and one with Irkalla the more attached. This is a combination that Tanan has been really enjoying, and we both feel that the 20-point modern version of the Intact is quite a competitive basic infantry unit for what it's capable of doing and what you are paying to bring them. Then he's running his favorite combination of echoes with the needle. This is an extremely tough A unit, and it has the ability to resurrect a member once it loses the first echo, so that's really not something I have enjoyed playing against, even though we do have to take into the account that previously the needle was able to bring back models using command tokens, which was really obnoxious, but these days using stitch up bodies, assemble bodies is a tinge skill, so you actually need to spend a short action skill to use it, which can make it a bit more resource intensive and situational an ability to use. Tanan was wanting to test out the breath that comes out in the new starter box, and then he picked Namayon as his main element for tracking the vestige once it got further away from his lines, potentially saving up the Namayon for that last leg of the journey. And with that, we are off to the races. As you can see from this picture, we were playing with the exact same map as we were in the first game. I have simply shifted the objectives around. Unfortunately, and obviously, I don't have big enough circles to serve in influence zones, so I have chosen to remove the smaller ones from underneath my objective markers. This time around, it's Tanan's turn to win the initiative role, and I choose the northern table edge as my deployment zone, feeling that it is slightly superior to the southern one. Then it's my turn to start deploying, and I rather non-committedly place a unit of orc hunters dead center of my DZ. Tanan counters with a basic unit of his, deploying a unit of Intact pretty much opposite my orc hunters. I put down my next unit of orc hunters, not wanting to decide which officer to attach to my first unit at this point, but Tanan smartly plays for time and places Irkalla in the Intact, effectively forcing my hand. I proceed to add my contender to the middlemost unit, giving her orc commander ability the widest possible access to my units, and Tanan chooses to reinforce his middle/right flank with the echoes. We both then place our next characters. For me it's Lotta, and for Tanan it's the needle going into the echoes, as I hate Tanan often does. This means that I have effectively only a single unit left to deploy, and I choose to place my ice archers opposite of the Intact and the echoes. I figure that I can use them with their decent enough movement to capture the middle in one activation, should I choose to do so, and then I can start double tapping Tanan's units as they approach the middle line of the table. Tanan takes control of the left flank with the Anointed, and my last piece to go down at this stage is Selika. Tanan then deploys the rest of his forces, reinforcing the left flank with a unit of Intact and attaching Uruk to the Anointed in a expectation of me deploying some scouts there to threaten the left hand Tanan objective. Then the Scions deploy their breath to the extreme right flank of their force, so as to force any scouts of mine deploying on the right flank to deploy further away from Tanan's deployment zone. And this is a good catch from his part, because I do indeed have those 2 units of scouts that I'm about to deploy next. Understandably, the situation from here on out is pretty grim from the get-go when we view it from the science side of the table. I choose to split up my scouts, deploying one on each flank, thinking that I can thus not only play the feat rather effectively, but I can threaten both of Tana's objectives, so that if the game isn't going the way I like in the middle or when it comes to completing track, I can always dash one or both of the units at Tana's objectives and thus try and apply some pressure this way. This is a situation where I feel that Scout really gives me a lot of value. I don't have to spend the also valuable activations to advance these units into position, but they effectively start from a position from which they can access these objectives from the very get-go. Tanan's last unit is the Namayon, and it's held in reserve so as to be able to track the vestige for at least the final leg of the journey, and that's the proper way to do it. I guess getting to roll a triple dice on the willpower roll and having access to that automatic success via stressing should mean that should the Namayon get to the vestige, it can track it successfully and hopefully close out the game for Tanan. Tanan chooses to take the first action, first activation of the game, and I feel that this is a situation where my scouts are once again producing some excellent value for me. Yes, in a track feat scenario, or adventure rather, going first might be a good idea when it comes to trying to complete the feat part of the adventure, but at the same time, influence zones can be very rewarding for the player that gets to activate last, because they get the last say when it comes to who will control what objectives at the end of the round when the scoring happens. So I'm pretty happy seeing Tanan feel like he's in a position where he has to go first. Tanan starts by using a rather tricksy play that I have come to know him for. He advances the breath in order to make a ranged attack against the Tantrum Marauders, and then he uses the switches gained from this ranged attack to not only place forward with the breath, but also to place a fog marker in a position that will impair my attempts to track my vestige once Tanan gets to move it towards his side of the board for the first time. I'm okay with this. I feel there is really no way to stop the breath from doing this if and when they are in a decent enough position as Tanan's breath was. But at the same time, the important part for me is that I am not within the range of the ranged attack slash the red lantern spell, so I don't get double tapped by the breath. Her attack roll also isn't the greatest, it's more about the tricks that she can play, and Tanan only manages to cause a single wound on my Tantrum Marauders, which is something that I can very much live with. On my first activation, the Tantrum Marauders used their excellent mobility to retaliate in force. I make a move action towards the breath, then effectively teleport on it by using Snow Leopard Tattoo, easily kill it in melee, not even having to stress for extra performance nor access Berserker Rage, and then I use the destroyed unit additional movement to fall back to the forest, but close enough to the objective as to be able to capture it for my own, thus applying some scenario play pressure on my opponent. We both agree that the fate of the breath was basically sealed from the get-go. There is no way to escape the Tundra Marauders, and this way Tanan was at least able to extract some value out of her by forcing me to deploy a little bit back and getting to deploy that fog marker. But now there is a hole in the line for Tanan on the right flank, so he chooses to advance the echoes to retake the objective, and that's what they do. echoes with the aspect of the defender and a needle attached go to such a high conquest value that they are really hard to outconquest effectively, and also they hit hard and they can take so much damage and they can return models into play. So this is really a strong A combination. My careful pre-measurement when placing the vestige pays off. I get to advance my ice archers to capture the middle objective and also end their activation rather, in base-to-base contact with the vestige. I pick up my orange and yellow willpower dice, being rather confident that I will get at least that one success, but actually I get really lucky and I get two. And why this is rather important for the ice archers is the fact that now I don't have to stress in order to successfully track the vestige, which means that the ice archers still have access to double shot during this turn, thanks to the fact that activating them for a second time this round will cause a stress on them, and to access that Celica provided second shot will require another point of stress being taken. And as a morale 2 unit, had I been forced to take a point of stress to track the vestige, this second ranged attack would have been impossible, so that's decent enough for me. Tanan continues along with his plan and places my vestige token next to the fog marker, meaning that any unit of mine that's going to be tracking it next will have to endure a point of tinge for their efforts, which will in essence mean a more or less permanent point of stress on the unit in question due to the effects of tinge. Looking back at it, Tanan told me that he was not quite clear on how important it was to keep hammering what he calls the vestige button on this feat as quickly and as often as possible. And at this point, he feels that he's a little bit behind. Even though he's able to activate the intact to get into adjacency with his vestige and track it, I still have the upper hand when it comes to completing the feat because I have access to my vestige for my next activation also. Tanan also isn't as lucky as I was with his dice, so he only rolls a single success and needs to take a point of stress on the intact to secure the track. So this means that if I can push another point of stress through to the intact, they won't be activating anymore this round unless Tanan is willing to rest with them, which carries quite high an opportunity cost in and of itself. In my Tundra Marauders Go, once again, I again get to leverage their amazing mobility to dash out of the forest, Snow Leopard Tattoo into a position from which they can both perform a melee attack against the intact and also track the vestige. I choose to push for extra performance in melee, thinking that okay, I'm going to be up to a point of stress for activating for a second time during this round anyway, and I only have morale 2, and I feel I'm about to get hit by a counter attack of the echoes, which will essentially put me over stress or into full stress mode anyway, so I might as well get some value out of my morale now that I'm here. I'm really not at all worried about failing a willpower test and breaking because I have access to both Berserker Rage and not one step back due to my lovely Hersir over here. So the Tundra Marauders attack. They don't do all that much damage, but they do manage to push some through, which means that I get to push the intact back, meaning I'm no longer engaged in combat, and also I will put that all important point of stress on them so that they cannot counter attack me in turn. I end my activation next to the Vestige token, thanks to the positioning I did when engaging the intact, and this means that I can track the thing, and also I will take a point of tinge from the fog marker. Again, there is little to no risk for me tracking the Vestige over here. I get to roll that extra orange dice thanks to the fact that the Tundra Marauders are scouts, and even if I fail, there is always the possibility of simply paying a command token to pass the roll thanks to not one step back, which, as you can see, is turning out to be potentially an amazing scenario play tool also. And I still have access to the Berserker Rage for that additional success if I roll at least one and I don't want to spend a command token. So I have so many options here that there is practically no risk for me. The Tundra Marauders do me proud. Once again, they passed their test without me needing to actually pour any additional resources into it, and this means that Tanan gets to place the Vestige token once more, and he chooses to have it teleport place that is behind the echoes. Tanan's fourth activation ends up actually being the activation that more or less closes the game out, and it brings into a sharp focus why I love the Tundra Marauders plus the Hersir combination so much. And we also talk a lot about this with Tanan, how excellent a scenario play tool they are. Tanan does what he can and charges the echoes into the Tundra Marauders, and I have been at the receiving end of an echo charge too many times already, so I know this is going to hurt. But my aim is not to win the combat, my aim is to have enough of my stuff, that is the Hersir, survive so that I can access the Vestige and the objective once everything is said and done. In hindsight, I probably should have thrown down Caltrops with my Tundra Marauders, the previous activation. While that would not have prevented the echoes from engaging me, they would have been forced to assault, which would have meant that Tanan would not have had access to a charge attack reroll. But hey, I can't be too mad about this, thinking about how things eventually pan out. The echoes lay into the Tundra Marauders, and they do a pretty bad a number on them. Actually, they wipe out the entire unit, and if I remember correctly, they cause a single wound on the Hersir also. But the important part is that I roll at least one special, and had I not rolled a special, I could have always suffered a wound through Berserker Rage to access that special symbol that I can then use to activate the Marauder's switch ability that allows them to displace to disengage. And even though I feel that Tanan did the best job that he could, thinking about the geometry of the battlefield and the positioning of the units, it's simply next to impossible for him to reliably trap a larger unit with a unit of 3 models in a way that does not allow my rather nimble Hersir to escape the combat via the switch. As things go down, the Tundra Marauders get to activate their switch to displace to disengage, and all the Tundra Marauders drop dead at the end location. But this is of no consequence to me, since the Hersir has survived, and importantly has survived with at least a wound to spare. Due to the fact that I can now access his excellent Tattoo of Sturkrieg ability from here on out. Due to the fact that I have now disengaged via my switch, the echoes cannot push me back, and even though I do suffer a point of stress for having lost the combat, putting the Hersir over his morale value, there is no way for Tanan to keep the Hersir engaged, so as long as I pass either my willpower roll now or my willpower roll when tracking the Vestige next activation, I should be good to go. And as things go, my trusty Hersir does what he does, passes his orange and a yellow difficulty 1 willpower test, and the game is pretty much as good as over at this point. And why is that so? Some of you in the audience may ask, well, now I have a full activation on the Hersir, even though he is full on stress due to how detaching a character from a unit works. He loses the activation token that the Tundra Marauders had when the Tundra Marauders get wiped out. So even though the Hersir is at full stress, he has no activation token, and thus he can activate freely one more time. So I simply skirt around the echoes that try to box the Hersir in. I dash for the Vestige and for my opponent's right hand objective, and then I simply automatically pass the Vestige tracking test by taking a wound and accessing my upgraded Berserker Rage, the Tattoo of Sturkriege ability. I take a wound, I get to pick 2 symbols from my willpower roll, and I pick 2 successes, and voila, that's it. I have just completed the feat, scoring the full 4 arcane points from it. My opponent will only be scoring a single arcane point, and also, as I have the last activation of the round, I have now effectively put the scenario part of this game also outside my opponent's reach, because there is no way that Tanan can reclaim control of both of his objectives for the end of this round. So, chef's kiss for the Hersir and for the Tundra Marauders. Such a lovely unit combination, can't get enough of them. We end up calling the game right then and right there. Tanan says that he's not usually one to quit the game while there is still activations left to play, and I can attest to his tenacity for sure, but this time around there is simply no point in going on. Tanan has a single activation with which he can, for example, use the echoes to reclaim the right hand side objective and even take out the Hersir, but that'll do him pretty much no good, since then I have one last activation left and I can simply use my Orc Hunters to capture his left hand side objective. So the first round is going to end up with 3-0 military points no matter what, and the arcane points tally is going to be locked from the get-go in 4-1 in my favor, which means that we are looking at a 7-1 scoring difference after the first round, and there is simply no realistic way of Tanan climbing out of this one. We talked about this at length after the game, and we exchanged some messages afterwards, and Tanan said that he felt in retrospect that he did not understand how you need to be going for the Vestige all the time, every activation that you can from the very start of the game. And I feel a little bit bad about this, because I had some idea of how this was gonna work and how important this was, due to the fact that I had consumed Warcrow media in which there had been some discussion on this. Then again, I think that playing pickup games like this is a good way to get a feel for the different scenarios and the different feats, and there is no learning like learning through the experience of getting one's behind whooped. So I think that's not so dangerous. If anything, the one who is to blame here for anything is me for doing these battle reports, because this wasn't originally to be the case. This was simply supposed to be a couple of quick pickup games from which we can learn stuff and try some new things out. So I think Tanan has been really good sport about the whole thing. Alright, with the battle reports all done and accounted for, as already stated, I would like to use this opportunity to state some of my findings and deliberations on Warcrow as of right now. The first thing that has been on my mind of late has been the various forms of enhancing the activation economy of a company. And this is something that I have been crafting with quite a lot. And the games I just told the stories of also gave quite some food for thought in this regard. When it comes to the discourse online, for example, on the Warcrow's official Discord channel server, there seems to be a lot of emphasis by people on skills that provide additional activations for their company as is. Command skills such as experience and rage, offensive coordination, mental communion, and to a lesser extent something like the Warg and the Crow are really the things that people seem to be putting a heavy emphasis on. And I don't think these people are necessarily wrong, and these abilities when it comes to the things that I listed, actually these command skills can be tremendously powerful. But at the same time, it's not like a tactical awareness order in Infinity when you just get it when you include the stuff in your list, but rather you need to jump through certain hoops, perform certain triggers in order to get these additional activations off. And this, in a way, I feel diminishes the net value of these activations because trying to get to perform them will enforce suboptimal, even if only ever so slightly, but still suboptimal tactical choices and opportunity costs when it comes to building your company. And also at the end of the day, these extra activations are only so strong as the unit and the tactical situation that you find yourself in where you can actually access the said extra activation. And what I mean by this is that, okay, if I, for example, include a Prime Warrior in my Northern Tribes company, something that many players are extremely big on, that gives me access to additional activations, potentially activations, via the experience and rage command skill. But what I need to do is that I will need to get my Prime Warrior into a position where she can engage something to attack it, or she has to be the target of an attack that she then proceeds to survive in order for me to be able to activate this command skill. This all puts the onus on me, the player of the Northern Tribes, to try and engineer the situation where these boxes are ticked effectively, and then I can cash in my extra activation if and when I'm going to be paying a command token for that. And then the last important box that I need to have ticked is that I need to have a unit within the range of the ability, and this unit needs to be able to charge or attack an enemy unit in order for me to cash in the benefits of everything that I have done so far. And if we reach this position and I'm able to achieve triggering this skill and cashing in that extra activation, that is all well and good. But if I then go back and calculate the effects, combined effects of all the non-optimal choices that I had to make until that point and even after that point in order to access that extra activation, then I feel that the value of this extra activation may not be as amazing as it seems at face value. Then again, the Prime Warrior does do a lot of other things. She's a competent fighter in and of herself, and she does have the Orc Warriors on her ability, which allows her to reduce stress of my units when she engages, and that might actually be at least as important, if not more important. Obviously, all these types of pieces, models, rules, special abilities, we have to look at them in the whole context and also in the context of going through a series of games and not just optimal and the worst case scenarios, but still. At the same time, when it comes to the various forms of enhancing the activation economy, there are other ways of achieving this beyond getting full or partial extra activations that are called just that. For example, I have personally been extremely impressed by the performance of many of the Northern Tribes Scouts units with the post 1.5 update ruling on scouts being able to deploy next to the table edge from the get-go of the game in the scouts deployment phase. And this is, in my mind, pretty much almost as valuable a way of producing activation economy in many cases. Those scouts don't have to spend the activations to advance into a position in which they can be relevant. They start potentially threatening enemy objectives or standing in the way of enemy troops ready to engage them, and in the case of some extremely maneuverable units, they may even start within the range to attack enemies from the very get-go. And I think that even though these types of activation economy benefits are not worded as extra activations, they can almost be extra activations when it comes to the big picture of playing a game of Warcrow. The same goes for powerful double attack capable units. If your unit possesses, for example, a ranged attack and a special ability or spell that acts as a ranged attack, there are scenarios where they can almost double activate for the price of one. Look no further than the hated and looked up to ranged assassin slash damage dealer piece of the game in Lady Telia. Or, if you want to look closer to home, the Tundra Marauders, even though their offensive output isn't all that amazing, but still. Or, as was the case in these games played today, the Ice Archers with Celica. Then again, as already stated, you do have to pay for some of these combinations if they are indeed something that you need to build into your lists. Lady Telia is a plug and play option, but the Celica and the Ice Archers combination is not. You need to pay those extra points and go through the extra trouble in order to make that work. So is that going to be worthwhile? Sometimes yes, maybe sometimes no. Also, there are ways of getting out of activation movement in the game. The sharp perception ability of the Dark Master is one such instance, but that's more of a counterplay than actually a way of improving your action economy in many cases, since it's reliant on your opponent giving you those moves. But somebody like, for example, the Twins Bond on the Frostfire Herald and the Gale Falchion can actually have this almost extra activation effect without your opponent getting to have a say in the matter. So my point is that might there be, I'm not saying there is, but might there be a situation in the general discourse around Warcrow meta and tactics that currently overvalues extra activation providing abilities and maybe slightly undersells the power of other ways of enhancing the activation economy in ways that are not strictly extra activations. I think only time will tell. Next up, I have some thoughts when it comes to feats and scenarios playing together to create the adventures. First and foremost, I want to get it out there once again that I absolutely love this way of building the missions for Warcrow tournaments and tournament-like pickup games, competitive pickup games. The anatomy of having two equally important but very distinct parts of scoring feels extremely fresh and good to me. And I am really interested to see all the various combinations that the feats and scenarios will be able to create going forward. But something that I was starting to think, especially after playing the two games that we had today, was that it would seem that there are some rather strong scenario dynamics in many of these missions or adventures. And the feats can have the power to either enhance the dynamics of the base scenario, or they can have the power to counteract some of those dynamics. And let me quickly explain what I mean by this. If we take as our example the first adventure that we played today, the consolidated progress scenario makes it possible for a player to not lose when it comes to military points if they can simply hold their two friendly objectives for the entirety of the game. So let's say we are the blue player in this case. If we can access these two blue objectives and hold this line, effectively cutting our enemies off from gaining access to them, we will not lose on military points no matter what happens. Yes, obviously they could be using ambushers or scouts to try and bypass that line, but if we simply have enough high conquest units sitting around those objectives, that should not be a problem either. So technically it's possible to defend yourself into a scenario tie in the very least when it comes to consolidated progress. If we then combine this scenario with the feed resources, we only need to advance to this line, after which obtaining resources is going to be legal for our units, which essentially means that we are more or less looking at the same line twice. So if we get our units to the front of our friendly objectives, less than the midway point of the board, then we are in a position from which we can cut off enemy access to our objectives and or pile on conquest onto the conquest areas around the objectives. And at the same time, we can be taking stress and rolling to obtain resources potentially every activation. And this can potentially, in my mind, lead to a situation where these two ways of scoring are very much reinforcing one another, and it does incentivizing a situation where the player is not eager to advance past this point, because if they are rolling well on their resource obtaining rolls, if they have enough units, large units that is, to just keep rolling and getting more and more resources, they will win this game as long as they get more resources than their opponent. And if both players should decide that, okay, that's the way I'm going to try and play this mission or this adventure rather, we could potentially end up in a situation where both sides simply advance to hold their own objectives and then they start digging for resources, and that's a game of Warcrow right there. Obviously, one side is going to fall behind when it comes to obtaining those resources, whether it's because they don't have as many large units as the other side, or they are simply rolling poorly, as my opponent has done a couple of times when we have played resources so far. And this may lead into a situation where one side, the losing side that is, feels the need to try and break the dynamic of the current game and try and go for an all-out offensive. But then again, that should usually lead to their defeat. They should be unable to achieve this ad hoc goal of theirs of pushing their opponents off their objectives, and this should simply reinforce the side that is already winning the game. In a tournament setting, this could actually lead into a situation where the losing player simply decides to forfeit the game but not engage in order to safeguard that single tournament point of theirs, because the victorious side needs to win both on arcane points and on military points in order to get the 4-0 victory over their opponent when it comes to the tournament points. So simply safeguarding those two objectives no matter what will get you that single rather important tournament point in this scenario. Obviously, I don't think many players are going to go that route. And I think there are going to be players who are looking at this adventure as a chance to unbalance their opponent by hammering them with a strong attack or something. But it's just that I feel that there is a self-reinforcing battlefield dynamic when it comes to this particular combination of scenario and feat. If we then proceed to take a look at the second adventure that we played today, Influence Zones and Track, we see a very different battlefield dynamic going on, but yet again one that is imposed by the scenario and reinforced by the feat. In influence zones, you are looking to capture more objectives than your opponent, which means maneuvering aggressively and potentially spreading out your forces quite wide. Needing to capture at least 3 objectives for gaining the military point advantage is crucial here, and you are also highly incentivized to go after your opponent's objectives to get the better on them. If we then combine this with the track feat, we see that if we are once again imagining ourselves on the blue side, the starting line of the blue vestige is pretty close to the objectives that we are first going to be going for. And if we get to track the vestige successfully, our blue vestige token can advance as far as about here, which means that we are now again more and more incentivized to go after our opponent's objectives, thanks to the fact that our vestige token will be around the enemy objectives as well. So we are looking at spreading out our forces, maneuvering aggressively, and going for the throat of our opponent, so to speak, both from the scenario point of view and from the feat point of view. Okay, so far we have seen more or less examples of the feat fortifying or amplifying the dynamics imposed by the scenario. Now let's take a look at the alternative where the feat is counterbalancing the dynamics of the scenario. Let's take a look at the same 2 scenarios and feats from before, but let's mix them up. First, if we start by mixing take positions and track. We still have that quite easy to access defensive line for holding back your opponent on the scenario side of things, but at the same time, as we track our vestige, it'll keep running away from us, placing away from us, and that should incentivize us to go further and further towards our opponents instead of passively holding the line. And this will create potentially a situation where both sides are defending and both sides are attacking in order to score the feat, and this feat scoring competition more or less drags each player towards also trying to compete for the other player's objectives instead of simply holding their own. At the same time, if we are playing influence zones, then we are already heavily incentivized to go for the kill when it comes to maneuvering aggressively and widely forward. And in this instance, having the resources feat will in a way counteract this aggression and this spreading out, because players are going to have to endure extra stress on the units that they would be using to advance and capture the objectives in order to also play the feat. And this can essentially have the prospect of slowing down the tempo of the game somewhat. Which leads us back to the feats as a counterbalancing or a scenario dynamic reinforcing method. I would think that in a single list in a tournament environment, which is how Warcrow seems to be designed at this point when it comes to tournament play, I think both ways of choosing reinforcing or counterbalancing feats for your scenarios can work. If we are playing a series of scenarios with feats that enhance the dynamics inherent in the scenario, then I feel and I theorize that the tournament adventures can turn out to be a consecutive series of gear checks. Can your list, can your company achieve this dynamic or play with this dynamic in play and succeed at what it is doing? And if the answer to the question is no, then that can be a hard no, and then the game can be over rather quickly, as was the case in today's second battle report, for example. Then again, if you are wanting to have more balanced adventures, then you can pick feats that counterbalance the dynamics of the scenarios involved, and this means that each game would have a more diverse set of dynamics and objectives that the players are going for, and players and companies that are capable of going wide in all of these or many of these adventures might come out on top, and we might potentially see less blowout style games. I don't necessarily think that either way is better or worse, especially now that I have not played all the scenarios and feats that are out there. Not to speak of all the combinations especially, but I think this is something that we can have a think about going forward. I actually did a quick analysis by myself trying to identify the feat and scenario combinations that are very much in the reinforcing category and the ones that are in the counterbalancing category. And actually, I didn't find all that many problematic combinations that would result in a very strong singular dynamic that can then dictate how the game goes. There were a few, but by far less than half. So I think there is room for whatever choice people are looking to make. The next theory that I have been pondering about is whether companies building for competitive success in the current Warcrow tournament environment should go easy on the bling. This theory was very much kickstarted by seeing the results of the Interplanetario tournament and seeing that the list that actually won the entire event was not so much running all the strongest options with the most blingy attachments possible, but rather it was a list that was foregoing some of the more powerful and expensive elements in order to have more of the basic stuff. And this seems to have worked in the context of this event at least. And as I'm playing more and more of the adventures and especially the scenario side of things, there seem to be quite many adventures that impose heavy board presence and or maneuver and or stress taking costs on the companies involved. And at the time being, I'm having the feeling that high-end companies with fewer elite tactical elements may struggle in such an environment, because every point of stress that they are taking, every action that they are committing a larger percentage of the company's available resources for the task. And these more elite tactical elements are by their very nature more susceptible to asymmetrical countermeasures that the opponent can leverage against them. And if the player commanding the more elite force is forced to make tactically otherwise suboptimal decisions in order to play the adventure, this may indeed leave them up for those set asymmetrical countermeasures. At the same time, there are instances where companies made up of larger amounts of weaker tactical elements can seem to punch above their weight. The resources feed, for example, clearly rewards larger, cheaper units that can be used to take that stress, dig those resources, and at the same time provide, for example, conquest value or guard duty or whatever else is required. Many of the scenario and feed combinations have quite a large number of adventure elements that need to be interacted with, and I have seen in my games a tendency for companies to quite quickly run into a situation where they don't have enough tactical elements and activations to cover all the elements of the adventure being played, which opens them up for once again asymmetrical counter moves by their opponent. For example, capturing an enemy backline objective with a Conquest Zero ambusher becomes quite possible if and when the opponent's force cannot afford to leave decent Conquest units guarding all their backline objectives due to the attrition or adventure play necessities of the adventure currently being played. I also feel that lists that go wide on their unit selection and have more units to draw their power from can pack more total conquest, more total stress tolerance, and more total casualty resistance into the company's ranks than a more elite company of the similar point size will be able to do. So my current theory in all of this is that maybe the in competitive sense most viable company construction etiquette at the moment or the way going forward might be to have a wide lists of more or less basic troops that are then whose combat power is then multiplied by adding blingy enablers to your basic units rather than having a all-out elite force of a band of heroes type list. Obviously, it's way too early to tell whether this is the case. This is simply the theory that I have as of right now, but I'm eager to test this stuff out and then also to test out more elite and maybe character driven lists and see where I can push those. And my last point for today is that the Northern Tribe Scouts seem really strong. I have sung the praises of the scout units of the Northern Tribes in today's battle reports already quite a number of times. I have especially been loving running the Tundra Marauders plus the Hersir and the Dark Master and the Orc Hunter, since these are two very plug and play combinations that can be added to any lists and they don't require any enablers for them to work. At the same time, I extremely highly rate the Skin Changers plus Lotta combination, but that requires War Alliance in your list, so there is an opportunity cost to be paid there, obviously. Being able to drop competent combat units and or maneuver and or adventure and or scenario play elements to the sides of the table far away from your own deployment zone from the very get-go feels really strong. Obviously, your opponents and my opponents are going to be innovating to counter these plays, but at the same time, how resource intensive those counter plays are going to be and how much room will they leave for counter adaptation. I don't necessarily think that all the forces or many of the forces have access to strong scout units as of right now. So I'm positively looking at the situation where the Northern Tribes' strength of having such powerful scouts is part of their faction identity and not a bug of the system, so to speak. And I'm just having my fingers crossed that that'll stay the case. This is something that my friend Tanan and I have been talking about quite a lot. Tanan also feels that the change or clarification to how scouts work has been really big a deal, and it has really elevated the northern tribes, especially to a way loftier position when it comes to how powerful a faction they are. And Tanan really feels that this has been a key game changer for how the gameplay is going forward. And we will be seeing if the strength of the scout options available to various factions is going to actually be an important part on evaluating how strong a faction is. Phew, that was a short couple of hours spending time with Grotnip and with Warcrow. I thank you all very much for indulging me on these shorter battle reports and the rant or rants that followed. I hope to see you all again soon. Safe journeys, fellow travelers.